Welcome to episode 44 of the Headspace and Timing podcast. In this episode, I'm talking to Stacy Pearsall, an Air Force veteran, photographer, and creator of the Veterans Portrait Project, which provides veterans with a complimentary, high-resolution portrait that they can share with friends and family. Their portraits and stories are also included in national printed exhibitions, showcased in video productions, and shared via social media, ensuring that their contributions to American military history are never lost. The Veterans Portrait Project collection represents over 22 million military veterans in the United States. They're young and old, male and female. They come from all walks of life and have varied religious beliefs, levels of education, and racial ethnicity. What unites them all is their service. It's a bond that cannot be broken. Stacy is proud to be one of them, and I'm honored to be able to share her story with you.
All that I experienced, I had to end the way that I did because I needed to be able to go through those emotions and go through that pain and allow myself to better understand the pain of others so that I could offer solace and really mean it.
Welcome to the Change Your POV podcast network. You're listening to Headspace and Timing, a show dedicated to breaking down the stereotypes about veteran mental health. My name's Dwayne France, and I'm a combat veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan. After I retired from the Army, I took on a new mission as a clinical mental health counselor for my fellow service members. If you served in any branch of the military, you're familiar with the M2 machine gun, the 50 cal. It's one of the most effective weapons in the military's arsenal. If the weapon's headspace and timing wasn't set right, however, it was just a huge useless chunk of metal. Veterans can be rendered inoperable if their headspace and timing isn't set correctly either. That's my goal with this show, to change the way that we think and talk about veteran mental health and reduce the stigma against seeking support. Each week, we'll talk with mental health professionals, veterans, and those who support veterans, service members, and their families. We're going to have real and honest conversations about a topic that most just don't like to talk about, veteran mental health. Let's jump into this week's conversation. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Headspace and Timing podcast. Once again, and as always, we appreciate you taking your time to listen here. Out of the many things that you could be doing with your time, taking the time to listen and learn more about veteran mental health is going to do you well and do your fellow veterans well. So, as you know, we're here after the beginning of the year. We just got done with a big push with our Veteran Mental Health Boot Camp, that series that finished out over the last 2 weeks of 2017. And usually, as you know, I bring on mental health professionals who talk about the work they're doing with veterans. And occasionally I'll bring on veterans who have their own mental health stories, their own mental health journey, and who are helping other veterans. And my guest today is really doing a lot with helping veterans and helping veterans sort of reconnect with their roots, and has a pretty neat story herself. And so my guest today is Stacy Pearsall, and Stacy is a Air Force veteran. She was an Air Force photographer at the age of 17, and I'm not going to give the entire bio. I'll let Stacy tell a little bit about herself. So, Stacy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. And so I reached out to you at the end of 2017, maybe October, November, because of the great work that you're doing with the Veteran Portrait Project. I've been looking and watch. I could spend hours just looking at the work that you're doing. But before we get into that, I'd like to have you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, maybe your military experience.
Absolutely. I was a military photographer, as you mentioned, in the Air Force. And ironically, I spent most of my deployments wearing an Army uniform. And my job was to basically cover down on any sort of training exercises across the globe, as well as humanitarian relief, and of course, combat operations. And my job really brought me through 42 countries where I told the military story for all the people that were here back in the States and couldn't be there for themselves. And really, my job, I felt like, was the best job in the military. And when it came to an end, it was very bittersweet. And I sort of got listless in the wake after my medical retirement. And anyway, that kind of leads us into post-traumatic stress and dealing with that. And that's pretty much the cliff notes of my story.
So, and how long did you serve?
Well, I served 10 years in uniform, 12 years on paper.
Sure. And so that 10 years, and especially now with these experiences or these current eras, 10 years, you can pack a lot within 10 years. Actually, one of the section sergeants that deployed with me when I was a platoon sergeant, he was in on the invasion of both Iraq and Afghanistan in both surges, and then after the end of 10 years, he said, "I'm done." Right? So there's a lot that could be packed into that 10 years. But it's interesting, you as a combat photographer, that you didn't just see through your own eyes, but you saw combat through the lens, right? So you saw it in a different way than other soldiers did. I think I've spoken to other combat camera, and it's a different way. You're seeing combat not for what's happening, but also for how to present it to those that aren't there, right?
Absolutely. I think it sticks with us a little bit more than the memories that we have, because the pictures are tangible. We can always refer back to them, and they're kind of seared into our mind's eye, because it takes a lot to preconceptualize an image, to go through the motions of capturing it, and then it's not necessarily just archived in the picture form, but it's archived in our minds, each and every picture, each and every person that we meet, each and every caption we write down. And so each individual is no longer just some anonymous individual. It is a person who has, even for a brief moment, impacted our lives.
That makes a lot of sense, especially from a mental health standpoint. With brain functioning, that lower part of our brain is sort of the black box where everything gets encoded and our memories stay there. But that front part of our brain with the cognitive processing, that's what you're using as a photographer, as you say, to how am I going to tell this story? How am I going to frame this shot? And so for you, it's almost, and not to push the metaphor, but it's almost double imposed, right? It's double exposed, I should say, both in your subconscious memory, but also in your conscious memory.
Yeah. Yeah. And, after my last deployment, I took a real long time before I went back into my archives and actually looked over the photos. It's hard to disconnect the imagery with the sort of visceral memories that go along with it, the emotional experience, the smells, all the things that our memories tend to link with certain visuals in our mind.
And again, that is a thing for a lot of veterans. Of course, if we watch, maybe Vietnam veterans watching Platoon, but just recently, the miniseries A Long Road Home just finished up, and that was a very good depiction of the early parts of Iraq in 2004, the uprising inside our city. And so families, as we've been talking about in the Change Your POV podcast network, families are understanding more about what that is, but they're not getting the full experience. They don't get the smells, of course. Maybe they get the sounds, a little bit of them. They get the visuals, but they don't get that full sensory experience of the smells, the feel of the cold sweat running down your back, or the feel of hair standing on end. So I can very much see that as you went back and sort of looked over your archives, they weren't just pictures for you. They were, as you said, tangible memories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you mentioned, and you've said on some of your interviews that your transition was difficult. So what? Yeah. maybe that's an understatement. But tell me a little bit about your transition, what that was like.
Sure. Well, I think it all goes back into, first of all, after my deployment, I had a deployment in Iraq in 2003 and again in 2003, 2004. And so when I came back in 2004, I went to Syracuse University. So I had 10 months off, and I was physically rehabilitating from an IED. And it took a Vietnam veteran kind of cornering me and saying, "You got some things you got to deal with. Let me hook you up with a vet center." Because the thing was, I had not been sleeping very well. And before I even left for Syracuse, I was stationed at Charleston Air Force Base at the time. I went to the mental health clinic because I knew I had some issues, and I was sort of self-identifying, like, hey, this is a little stressful. Maybe I need to talk to somebody. And I went there, and the gal behind the desk asked if I was there for marriage counseling.
Right. She thought you were a spouse.
Right. And then she proceeded to say, well, did you talk to your primary care provider? And I was like, well, what does he have to do with it? I'm like, it's not a physical health issue. It's a psychological mental health exercise. Like, I need support in that regard. That's why I'm not sleeping. And she just sat there open mouth chewing her gum, which was vexing, deeply vexing. And I got really frustrated. I was like, you know what? Forget it. So I turned on my heel and I walked out, at which point one of the counselors had overheard what had transpired, and she ran after me. She's like, please come back. I'm like, no, that's it. I'm done. It took a lot for me to get in here in the first place, because there's so much stigma around it. And she's like, well, at least see the chaplain. Let me hook you up with the chaplain. I was like, fine, I'll hook up with the chaplain, no problem. So we set an appointment. And of course, like a good military member, I was there 15 minutes early. And 5 minutes go by, 10 minutes go by. It's the time of the appointment, and he's still not there. Like, his door is locked, like lights are out. And I wait 15 minutes after my appointment. Come to find out, the chaplain had totally bounced on my appointment and went golfing with the commander instead. Therefore, that sort of set me up for my distrust for mental health providers or counseling or support. Later, down the road, when I was approached by the Vietnam veteran, he said, let me hook you with a vet center. I was very skeptical. And whilst I was in Syracuse, I did link up with a gal by the name of Pat Chase, and she was the team leader there at the vet center at Syracuse. An amazing woman, and I attribute her for giving me so many skills, ones that I needed to really understand the experience that I was going through. Pat Chase, I really attribute to giving me some skills that I needed moving forward. I wanted to stay in the military, and I wanted to be the best I could. And I knew that this was always going to be part of the job. There was always going to be stress about it, and things that you take home with you, and things you have to cope with moving forward. So she gave me some really great coping skills. Thus, I deployed again and again and again. And after my last time, I came home, and I really thought I was doing all right on my own. Truth be told, I had been injured in Iraq again, and this time I was not healing as fast as the military would like, and therefore they put me on a temporary retirement. It was like having the rug pulled out from underneath me, because I was a military photographer of the year 2 times, and going out that year, I was military photographer of the year that year. And then said, okay, well, you're not going to spontaneously get better, so we're retiring you. It was really, really difficult, because I hadn't really coped with losing friends and seeing my battle buddy get shot and feeling really guilty about that. The shoulda, woulda, couldas that we all deal with in military. And on top of all that, I felt completely and utterly abandoned again by my unit, because my husband, because we were both service members, was also deployed and was still deployed. And therefore, people from my unit were meant to take me to my doctor's appointment and pick me up, drive me there. I would get put under anesthesia. When I came out, they were to drive me home. And there were mornings they wouldn't show up, and I would be taking a taxi to my doctor's appointment. So feeling the loss of my career, feeling completely abandoned by the people that I had trusted, implicitly, and then dealing with post-traumatic stress, which I thought I was doing all right, but I really wasn't. And it was just all coming down on me at once. I was in a very, very dark place.
And that's as you left the Air Force, the support wasn't there. And so you probably didn't expect that support would be there after you left the service. There's this concept of how we as individuals prepare to change, right? We have to know that there's a reason for us to change. We have to want to change and actually, come around to that. The military, and I'll admit it myself, the military really doesn't care whether you're ready for that change or not. That change happens. you leave. Wherever you're at in that process of getting used to not being in the military anymore, they say, okay, your time is done and you have to be out. And so that can be, like you said, the rug pulling out from underneath you. But, I've going from 90 miles an hour to 0 and slamming on your brakes. I've described it as jumping out of the plane into a fog and not sure if your parachute's going to open. I mean, all of those different metaphors to describe when I retired, Stacy, it was 22 years. I started planning my retirement really 4 years out, 15 months out. For you, you didn't have that lead time. You didn't expect to get out after 10 years. You thought you were going to be in for much longer, and it was a very abrupt departure. And at the time when you needed help most, you were less likely to 100%. Get it and less inclined to seek it. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, I mean, and even your description of how it was for veteran going into the counseling office is one of the reasons why I want to do this podcast, is to be able to let other providers who want to help veterans know that that's not what you do, right? That's not how you manage someone, especially the stigma of trying to reach out for help. But that's the reason why most veterans will avoid treatment. They will. And I often say it, veterans don't need a real good reason to avoid therapy. And you had a couple of really good reasons to avoid therapy, and you just said, screw it, I'm not going to do it. If we clinicians, if we're telling veterans to come knock on the door, we need to be there to open the door when they knock. Because if we don't, we're going to lose an opportunity.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. And, fortunately for me, I still had Pat Chase, who I could call up and say, I am not doing really well. And, through the phone, she would just offer me a chance to talk about what I was feeling and go through those emotions. So in a way, I never really was alone. It just it at that time. And I think when you are so immersed in your own mind and all of the emotions that you're feeling, it's hard to see the forest in spite of the trees. Things are often right in front of you. It's just, you just have to reach out and realize it's there. And for me, Pat had never left. I just was so blind by my own depression, I guess, in a way.
Right. I often explain it, veterans are down on the bottom of this well, right? And the walls are very close in, and they really don't see any farther than 3 or 4 feet in front of them, if that. And they may be shouting and they never hear a veteran, or they never hear anybody call back and say, hey, I hear you. There is a way out. It's just long and difficult. But that's where, again, for me to be able to talk to veterans is sitting down and talking to a therapist who understands the unique aspects of veteran mental health and military mental health, can help you get that perspective, that outside perspective. Let me get the thoughts. And I think, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but you as a photographer, you take pictures that you have in your head and you make them real in front of you, make them tangible, right? That's sort of the way that you develop, like you said, frame the shot. Therapists can do the same thing by you talking, this is my experience. And maybe we say, is that accurate? Maybe we say, is that a real way of looking at it? And so getting it out of your head and into reality gives you an objective way to sort of observe it. So after sort of that transition, you said there was a period of time before you really got into
there was this hiatus, and my doctors were very adamant that I was to sort of rest my body, and that I wasn't to lift anything over 5 pounds or stand it for any prolonged period of time, or basically, in a nutshell, not do photography. And that too was really crippling, not just sort of professionally, occupationally, and like fundamentally, I loved doing photography. So taking that away ultimately had an impact on me emotionally as well. And essentially, so the military took my career, the doctors are taking away my ability to do photography at all. And now what the heck do I do? I have no identity and no occupation. Now what do I do? And plus I was in so much pain, physical pain at the time, that I was drowning in pain management drugs, which was absolutely complex, making it more complicated than it had to be at the time. So it was a tough row to hoe.
Yeah, and again, in your experience, and we hear from many veterans in sort of the same way, you said they took away your identity, they took away your military identity, but your profession was also your identity. Combat photographer or being a photographer wasn't a job for you; it was who you are, it was what you did, and that leads to more existential concerns or purpose
Sure.
and meaning, rather than just post-traumatic stress disorder. And so if the doctors were trying to get you to rest in one aspect, but weren't giving you avenues to be able to still pursue something that was internally fulfilling for you and gave you a purpose, again, common experience for a lot of veterans, to really kind of break out of that, or even understand that that's an issue. One of my co-hosts, Jeff Adamek, in one of the original shows, he said that he was a Special Forces Green Beret, said the Army said I couldn't be me anymore. It's not to say that I'm not, I retired from being a teacher, but I am no longer allowed to be myself. And that's a fundamentally difficult thing for someone to
Right.
kind of transition to.
Right. Well,
To
now,
not
now,
have
now
anything
you're
to
putting
fill
your
that
life in
spot.
somebody else's control, and they are dictating to you who you can and can't be. And that is completely opposite about how we're trained in the military. You know what I mean? We are supposed to have control over our function in the service, what our key mission is, and to have positive control over our weapons and our area of operation, the person in front of us, and all these things. We have control over all of these things. And suddenly I found myself listless and completely and utterly out of control and out of touch. That, I think, too, was very difficult. Not only that, but how I could not articulate everything that I was feeling to my significant other at the time. So it was having a very negative impact on my marriage, which that was really the only good thing I had going for me at the time. And it was completely getting flushed down the toilet because of all of these outside factors.
Right, and again, that applies back to the series of podcasts, the Veteran Mental Health Boot Camp, that things that go just beyond post traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. I understand that you also have a traumatic brain injury. But those aren't the only things that are managed or that are challenging. The emotionality that comes from betrayal, from being betrayed by your unit, that, and maybe betray is a strong word, but I get the sense that that's really what you felt at that point. Not being able to meet your needs, and then family issues, all of these things compounding can really have an impact on a veteran's post-military life. So it's not that way anymore. Or maybe not as much that way. So how did you maybe
Well, once I
manage
got my
these things or resolve these things?
physical rehabilitation in check, and I was doing better with that, I made space in my life to begin doing mental health work. And so I found a counselor at my VA hospital, and they were doing, trust me, I've tried it all. I've done exposure therapy, rapid eye movement. Did I say prolonged exposure? Mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about traumatic brain injury. There you go. Anyway,
Yes.
if they were offering it, I tried it, and I actually gave prolonged exposure therapy a really good college try. I did it for 6 months. The thing was, it made me a wreck. And I would go in, and I was trying to work too. Like, I was trying to get back to work and do something functioning with my life. I would go in there and I would be so devastated walking out that I would have to just go home and lie down for the rest of the day. And my husband's like, "What is this doing to you? You're a wreck. You're a mess. This is awful." So after 6 months, and while I noticed some marginal change, maybe, it really, I think, the bad didn't outweigh the good results for me. So that wasn't really the right fit. And and again, I go back to I find solace in my work, and I think that is therapy for me. So when I began the Veterans Portrait Project in communicating and relating to my fellow veterans, that began the real healing process I needed and the validation I needed. And to be able to bounce my thoughts and ideas and emotions off of them was, I found, very therapeutic. So not only was I getting the camera back in my hands and kind of thumbing my nose at the doctors who said I wouldn't be able to do that, but also beginning the healing process emotionally and therapeutically for myself.
And so I see on your website, and I'll definitely make sure that the website and everything connected is going to be in the show notes. But
Yep.
it says that it started out as that cathartic process for you. That prolonged exposure, although it's opening up the closets and it's peeking in the duffel bags and you're unpacking everything and finding out stuff that you didn't know was there, but then you didn't really know what to do with that stuff, and it just kind of lingered, and it sounds like not a lot of assistance in tolerating the distress of these memories. That you found another outlet, and that was through the Veterans Portrait Project. Another thing, and I'm not sure if, not that we've talked extensively, but just the creativity in the arts. That's where you were comfortable. I mean, photography is much of an art as it is anything else, a profession. And so being creative and framing these shots, that's a different part of your brain that you're using rather than just talking about these memories. And so in many ways, it can lead to neurocognitive restructuring, and it can be physically healing as well as therapeutic, kind of emotionally. Does that make sense?
On the one hand, I use the Veterans Portrait Project as my therapy and my healing. But on the flip side of the coin, some veterans, they turn to drugs and alcohol. That's their scapegoat. Mine is workaholic. I am a workaholic. That is my way of deflecting and addressing my own emotions. So I will literally overwhelm myself with the Veterans Portrait Project in the hopes that I don't have to address the ugly feelings that tend to well up unexpectedly. So it's been a real learning process, and I would not say that I have completely nailed it. I have my own issues, and I wake up every morning saying, okay, today's going to be another challenge. But I found that the Veterans Portrait Project has been, for me thus far, one of the best outlets.
Well, and it's good awareness on your part, Stacy, that's just because it's not a quote unquote bad thing, it's not necessarily a good thing either. When I was getting ready to retire, and then all of a sudden I found I had all this time in my hands, I started throwing things up against the wall to see what they stuck, and they all stuck, and I found myself very quickly overwhelmed. I've been retired since 2014, and my wife recently said, I thought we were going to see more of you after retirement, not less. And so there's this urge to do, this urge to be, and that can sort of be debilitating. It can get in the way, but it's also good awareness that you kind of know that, and kind of pull that back. Now, I'd like to hear a little bit more about the Veterans Portrait Project. Again, I'm sitting here. This is some amazing photography that you have. So tell me a little bit about where it was when it started and kind of what it turned into.
Temporarily retired from the Air Force, and therefore the VA began to pick up my care. And I was going to see neurologists and orthopedic surgeons and yada, yada, yada. Like every other veteran, I waited in the VA hospital for hours on end waiting for my appointment because they were overbooked. And the thing was, at the VA hospital, I was a bit of an anomaly. Most of the people were twice my age. Most of the people were men, and therefore I stuck out like a sore thumb. Most people would be like, "Hey, bring in your grandpa to his doctor's appointment," and that was frustrating as all get out. Not only that, but I had to constantly remind doctors that I'm the veteran, that I had combat experience, that my injuries were combat trauma. I felt really, in a way, disenfranchised. I was like, do men have to do this every time they're at the VA hospital? I doubt it. There's an automatic assumption that, I'm like, what the H, man?
They don't.
This sucks. And feeling really pissy. And one day these Red Cross volunteers were there. They're passing out sodas and cookies. And I went to grab a soda, and the gal slapped my hand away, and she's like, "Those are for veterans." I'm like, "What the hell do you think I am?" I digress. Nonetheless, all of these factors, right? All of these reasons, coupled with my unaddressed PTSD and the loss of my career and all the things that I can't do, can't, not, all the negatives. I'm sitting there at the VA hospital, and an elderly veteran came and sat next to me. And he just sat and he stared at me. Oh, I could see him out of my peripheral vision, and I could feel the heat rising in my face. And I was about to tell him where to go when level heads prevailed, and I asked him what I could do for him. And it was just the moment he was waiting for. His eyes shot open wide, and he began to talk to me about his time in World War II. So there he was. He talked to me about surviving Normandy, about his time in France, about liberating a concentration camp. And I was thinking, wow, who's the prejudiced one now? Right? He didn't want to hit on me. He didn't want to make a pass at me. He wasn't staring at me because I'm this young female. He just wanted to converse and convey his own experiences and as they relate to mine. And here I am, the prejudiced one, thinking of all the negative things about him. In that moment, I realized you never know who you're sitting next to. And I looked around the VA and I was thinking every single one of these veterans in this hospital has an extraordinary story, like Mickey Doherty, the man who sat next to me that day. And I thought, okay, well, perhaps next time I'll bring my camera. So I talked to the public affairs officer at the VA, and I said, well, I want to bring my camera. And they said, fine, as long as they sign this HIPAA release. I'm like, sweet. So I would spend my hours whilst I was waiting for my doctor's appointments taking portraits. And then I found myself making appointments so that I could take portraits. And my first year at the Charleston VA, I captured 300 portraits and stories. And then I said, okay, I can do this. I can do this. And I started going to Georgia and North Carolina and other nearby states. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to photograph veterans in every state and province from which the U.S. recruits. That'll keep me busy for the rest of my life. And there you have it. It has been going on. It'll be 10 years next year. I have photographed 6,500 veterans.
Wow. And I think that I didn't even see the 6,500. I knew that was thousands, or it is over 6,000 veterans that you have on your website there. But just that idea of who's going to capture this story, who's going to capture the story of the generations that are passing. As we know, the World War II generation is passing. The Korean War generation is not far behind them. My father, a Vietnam veteran, was 69 when he passed away. And so the former generations of veterans and soldiers are passing away, and who's capturing their story. And that's something that you decided that you were going to be
I
the
figured,
one to at least capture this part of their stories.
What hadn't really occurred to me as as a year passed and I was taking these portraits was, in the military, I was an archiver of stories. I was relating all the things that I'd seen and captured that on the battlefield and sent that back to the loved ones. And in some instances, these men didn't come home, and therefore I was the person to take their last living picture. And that really weighed on me, and carrying that forward. The Veterans Portrait Project is just an extension of that, to make sure that for historical purposes and posterity, that these veterans, these men and women, are remembered for their contributions, albeit just this small little sphere in which they operated, made it, in a bigger picture, made the military work and made our operations successful and we all helped each other get through those experiences. And I think the Veterans Portrait Project is just an amazing way to honor that and to remember moving forward what sacrifices were made.
And I see that, as you were active duty and you were deployed, you were capturing the present in order to, like you said, archive for the future, right? And so it was very much, I am doing this now in order to look forward. But then afterwards, you were capturing history. So you were actually looking backwards. You were receiving this information, but you were capturing things 30, 40 years ago, and then
Yep,
and
exactly.
then also preserving that for the future. And so, what kind of response? I mean, like I said, I reached out because I think that the work that you do is amazing, and we'll make sure that the link to your Instagram and everything is there. You have veterans in however they want to be displayed, right? However they want to be portrayed. I've seen Native American veterans, some veterans, saluting veterans, holding pictures of other veterans. So what kind of response have you gotten from the veterans that have participated?
Typically, most veterans are very, very humble, and they are very cynical and also very trepidatious about taking part in the project. But once I get them in the seats, they realize that my experience as a combat photographer makes me understand exactly where they're coming from and what they're saying, because I know the lingo, and I know when they talk about this or that, I can relate to it. Therefore, they are put at ease, and I allow them to be who they really are without any fear of judgment or reprisal, and are always astonished to see the portrait in the end and how I've captured who they are in just under 10 minutes. And their families as well find out something new about them every time. And I find that extraordinary given that they've lived their whole lives with them. But then again, I think that speaks to the veteran community and just how quiet we are often about our experiences. And between you and me, you and I could chat about it because we know what we're talking about. To try and explain that to somebody who hasn't been through it makes it that much more difficult. So I believe that's where the success in the project comes, is everything that I experienced in the military was just a preamble to what I'm doing now. I had to go through that, and I realize this now. I had to go through that and experience all that I did to best be present of mind in order to do what I'm doing now. And it seems really strange to look back and feel the way I did at the moment that it happened. But then again, we are always thinking about what's best for us, or what we think is best for us, and our expectations, when not met, tend to make us deflated. But what I hadn't realized was all that I experienced, I had to end the way that I did because I needed to be able to go through those emotions and go through that pain and allow myself to better understand the pain of others, so that I could offer solace and really mean it.
And there's a couple of really great things that you brought out in that. Number one, the experience that you have that put people at ease. I'm sitting here listening. You could be a mental health counselor, Stacy. I mean, that's the kind of you are an experience nexus. I am an experience nexus. All of the veterans that I see as a therapist, I see them all, and I can find the commonalities to be able to say, this is how other veterans, this is what makes you, the client sitting in front of me, unique, and then what makes, what's common to all. But also I have the clinical training in my specific disciplines to be able to say, this is what works therapeutically, this is what works psychologically. Yours very much in the same way has that you're an experience nexus. You've physically laid eyes on over 6,000 veterans, through the Veterans Portrait Project, and you understand what is common. And so you have the lived experience and the professional training to bring out the best that's in them. And so that's a really excellent example of even how therapy can be if you get in front of the correct therapist. But that's really good. And then the piece of you saying that I went through that to do this, and this is as satisfying as what I did before. That's post-traumatic growth. That's the other side that not a lot of people think when they think about trauma and experiencing things that would lead to PTSD. They don't consider post-traumatic growth, and I call it coming out the other side of Valley of Death. when you come out the other side of the valley of death, we know that we're stronger, we're more resilient, we're more capable, and we can actually do more things and do them better maybe than we might have if we hadn't been through that. Does that kind of resonate?
It does. Yeah.
And just curious if it's something, have you heard of post-traumatic growth and what the concept is? Has anybody?
No, I've never heard of it.
You're kidding me.
I guess, no, I've never heard it. I guess I just live it. That's.
Well, and that's the other thing is a lot of veterans, they don't realize this is, look, there's actually a name for what I do, but there's a lot of research out of the University of Pennsylvania, and I'll make sure to give you some of the links, but also to the listeners in the show notes, that it is actually the flip side and the positive side. It's what builds resilience. I wouldn't be, if I went in to be a clinician when I joined the Army, I wouldn't have my lived experience. I wouldn't have what I went through. And would I be as good of a therapist? I don't know. Whether some might debate whether I am or not anyway. But just the idea of our lived experience, our trauma, you see it in cancer survivors after getting through with cancer, and then they have this newfound appreciation for life and this newfound meaning. And so it's an under-discussed and underrepresented aspect of, in a very real way, I couldn't have said it better than you did. You wouldn't be doing the very important and outstanding work that you're doing now if you hadn't gone through the pain that you went through.
Right.
And do you see that? I mean, and even the idea of, I can tell you, veterans like, am I wasting your time? Or am I, I don't want to, be, who am I? I'm not special. I'm not the one to take these pictures. Do you find yourself more encouraging to them, say you are important, you are special, and then that responds to them and makes them feel better in a way?
Well, I think each veteran is at their own impasse, so to speak, and not there are some that are ready to hear that, and there are others that need more time. And I don't flatter myself to be educated like you. I just have been, I guess, trial by fire in that my experience comes from just getting face value and face time with people. And some veterans, I'll tell Vietnam veterans, welcome home. And I may be one person, but I think that I speak for the whole country when I say thank you for your service. And this is the least that we can do, and the least that we owe you. And they'll just start crying because nobody's ever said anything like that before. And there are others who have come to grips with that already. They are past that point and over that bridge, so to speak. I'm just lucky that I have the ability to offer that solace and that comfort when the time presents itself, or the opportunity presents itself.
No, and you're doing great work. And this being in the audio version, I definitely encourage everyone to look up. And again, we'll make sure that the links are there. But just some of the pictures, like I said, I could sit here for hours just looking at this, because we as veterans value other veterans. We value service. We value history. I've sat with veterans, and like I said, I retired out of the 10th Special Forces Group supporting them. But I sat with the veteran who was there, in Bad Tolts when 10th Special Forces Group was there, sort of the birthplace. And it's amazing for us because we know the service, we know the sacrifice. One thing that I've come to believe, to be honest, is that this generation of veterans, yours and mine, and those of us who are serving currently, we have the ability, and in many ways, I believe the responsibility, to be this century's greatest generation. That we can have as much of a positive impact on this century as the post-World War II generation had on the last century. What do you think about that?
I think that the men and women that I served alongside are an incredible bunch of people. And I think I don't know. I wasn't alive during the years after World War II or Korea or Vietnam. So all I can really base this on is having been witness to all the years since 9/11, and to see my brothers and sisters come home and establish organizations like Team Rubicon and Team Racing for Veterans, or other organizations that are veterans helping veterans, veterans helping the community, veterans helping each other. And for instance, you and I talking openly about post-traumatic stress. All of these things, I think, are wonderful attributes as to speaking to great volumes of the humanity of our generation, and not wanting to rest on our laurels or to take it lying down. We are the generation that has stood up and said, okay, if it won't be done for us, we're going to do it for ourselves. And if that means that we are our greatest generation, then by all means, I would agree with that.
And I think that if each of us in our own way relies on the strengths that we have, you in your ability to capture, and I don't profess to be an artist as far as evaluating portraits. I know what I like, I know what I don't like, but the images that you captures emotion, captures. And literally, this isn't, fangirling over here, but some of the pictures have, it makes my hair stand on end. And you were using your skills to be able to express your world in your way, and in some way extend that to the veterans that you serve. And so in a very real way, I think that in spite of what you experienced, you've come out and you've thrived and survived. And not that we ever think that we're going to ever arrive, and not that I ever think that, it isn't an arrogance thing. I think that we as veterans now, as you said, a Vietnam veteran waiting for 40 years to actually address what you addressed a couple of years after. And so I talk to a lot of veterans who think that, life is maybe going downhill, that there's no future available. That I can't get a job and life sucks, and some of that is actually literally true in some of the challenges that they face. But I guess what I'm trying to say is you give me hope, and I believe that you'll give our listeners hope, and just faith in, regardless of how traumatic our past is, we can turn that to good use.
Well, I appreciate that. And I will always endeavor to live up to all the things that you just said. I sometimes, and I can't profess that every day isn't a challenge, because it is. Sure. And I think, and like I said, probably multiple times throughout this talk, is every day I wake up and I say, okay, I'm going to do this in spite of all of these other things, in spite of having seizures, in spite of traumatic brain injury, in spite of physical pain, in spite of post-traumatic stress and what this does to me. And I think that alone, in facing down that challenge, is what really motivates me to get through it. And each and every individual is going to find their motivation, but they have to want to seek it out and find it. And it'll be trials and errors. And I wish everybody nothing but joy and luck in that process, because it is a process, and just accept that as part of the journey.
And as part of the journey, and there are good things on the other side of that. This is a lot of the challenge with veterans that I work with, that they don't want to approach these painful parts. They want to avoid dealing maybe with, or however you want to say it. But then they get stuck on that negative side of this. Because they don't want to feel uncomfortable. They want to feel the psychological pain. They want to be rejected. They don't want to be judged, as you said. And Stacy, your experience as a female veteran at the VA, I've had guests come on that speak specifically about the need for understanding what women veterans experience, especially regarding mental health. And so there's just these subcultures on subcultures that we don't talk about. But until we start talking about mental health in general, we're not going to get these things out. I really appreciate you taking the time today and sharing your story. I know that you've shared your story before, and sometimes it may be easy to share it again or hard to share it again. But I appreciate your bravery, and I appreciate your honesty in sharing it. And I think it's really going to help veterans when they listen to this.
Well, thank you again, and thanks to all those who are tuning in, and I wish everybody well.
Before you go, where are you at? Social media, website? Go ahead and tell the listeners that, and I'll make sure it's all in the show notes.
Well, you can visit veteransportraitproject.com, and there you will find all of my social media links and my email address. If you have any questions that I didn't address during this talk, feel free to reach out to me. I'm an open book, and I will get back to you. I look forward to linking up with y'all on social media.
I do have a question. As I look as we're recording this, coming to the end of 2017, it's airing in 2018, but I don't see Colorado anywhere. You said every 50 states. Have you been out to Colorado yet?
I have been to Junction City, Colorado Springs, and Denver.
Oh, okay. Well, I missed you.
So sorry.
We'll have to we'll have to see. I mean, and that's and so this is maybe another opportunity. Is you travel around. And you have set dates that you're going to be somewhere. So if there's a schedule on the Veteran Portrait Project website, but how easy is it for a veteran to maybe get their portrait scheduled with you?
Well, if you follow the schedule if I'm close, we can always squeeze you in. I sometimes do RSVP, and walk-ins are welcome, time permitting. I would also say that if you follow me on social media, I will let you know in advance if I'm going to be doing a pop-up exhibition or a pop-up Veterans Portrait Project somewhere. And therefore, I would love to see you.
Well, I'm actually going to be about when this airs. There is a creative arts conference that's going to be coming, and so I'm definitely going to be making sure that everyone there is aware of this, because I think that creativity has a significant aspect in recovery. One of our earlier episodes was with Brian Dories and the Art of War Project, and how theater as an expression of mental health is emerging, and I think that you fall into that category. So, great job, Stacy. If nobody told you yet today, you're doing awesome work.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right.
You're listening to Headspace and Timing on the Change Your POV podcast network. Wow, so there you have it, folks. Stacy Pearsall. You know, it was really great to be able to talk to Stacy and to be able to have a conversation, not just about her work and her work sharing the history of veterans and sort of the portrait of veterans. You know, and I've said it a couple times throughout this episode, but you really need to go check out the pictures that she has that on her website, and of course, again, all of that's in the show notes. But it's just some really amazing and impactful visual, emotional portraits that really capture sort of the things that veterans aren't able to talk about, but they want to be able to say. And I really appreciate Stacy's sharing of her experience of just transition to mental health. You know, a lot of veterans that I work with talk about that kind of thing that she talks about, even at the beginning with women veterans in the VA. It's true. It happens. It's there. You know, she is very upfront about it. And then just the struggles that she has originally at first trying to seek out mental health services. You know, unfortunately, that's something that we as mental health professionals or individuals that are there trying to support need to do a better job of. And then of course, her work with the Veterans Portrait Project. It actually turns out after Stacy and I talked, and I mentioned the Joining Creative Forces Summit that's happening. Actually turns out that through some of the connections that I have, that Stacy's actually going to come out and talk about the impact of photography and mental health and the intersection between arts and how arts can be a healing factor in veteran mental health. And so that event is actually going to be occurring the week that this is airing. And so this is going to be coming out live on Tuesday. and that event is going to be held in Colorado Springs on Thursday and Friday of that same week in February. And so this is a huge aspect of the connection between how mental health professionals, artists, and the expression of veterans can join together for ultimate healing. And I think Stacy is a great example of that. So thanks for listening, and check out the show notes at changeyourpov.com and veteranmentalhealth.com. And we look forward to talking to you next week.
The struggle is real, found a feast and lost a soul. Eventually my drinking, it got out of control. There in darkness I roam, struggling to find home. See, suddenly death didn't feel so alone. 22 a day, destination unknown. It could have been avoided if you picked up the phone, but now you're gone, so I guess all we get is the tone. Nothing but bone weeds, overgrown, pushing up stones. I've triumphed over enemies, co-created enemies. Broke out facilities that tried to put an end to me. R.I.P. I'd rather grind in tranquility. Authentic tendency, embrace my ability.
So there you have it, folks. Another episode of Headspace and Timing, a show dedicated to changing your perspective on veteran mental health. I'd like to thank Doc Todd for giving us permission to use the track Not Alone from his amazing album, Combat Medicine. Doc's a guy who's trying to bring the discussions about veteran mental health out of the darkness and into the light, and you need to check him out. Head over to therealdoctodd.com to purchase the album and support the cause. You're not alone, veterans. Ever.
The struggle is real, found a feast and lost a soul. Eventually my drinking, it got out of control. There in darkness I roam, struggling to find home. See, suddenly death didn't feel so alone. 22 a day, destination unknown. It could have been avoided if you picked up the phone, but now you're gone, so I guess all we get is the tone. Nothing but bone weeds, overgrown, pushing up stones. I've triumphed over enemies, co-created enemies. Broke out facilities that tried to put an end to me. R.I.P. I'd rather grind in tranquility. Authentic tendency, embrace my ability.
Try so hard to have faith. I bow my head and I pray. Lord, please lend me the strength to carry on and keep staying. How this life's so demanding, so much pain, all this plenty. I heard each time I wake, but with you I'm not alone.
Not alone. You're not alone.
Ah, yeah. And every time that I fall, I'ma call on you, get myself back up again.
Without my Georgia girls, yeah, I'd probably be dead. Cause I'd be taking every nail that the VA said. Gave every shred, every last thread of my identity. Conquer my fragility, eliminate the enemy. Deliver me, God, from temptation. Tell me that this life is just a matrix. Need a facelift, back to basics. Vision LASIX, I only feel alive when I hear the bass kick.
Oh, I try so hard to have faith. I bow my head and I pray. Lord, please lend me the strength to carry on and keep staying.
Stand up.
How this life's so demanding, so much pain, all this plenty. I heard each time I wake, but with you I'm not alone.
Not alone. Yeah. You're not alone.
Ah, yeah. And every time that I fall, I'ma call on you, pick myself back up again.
Yeah, just pick up the phone, you're not alone. Just pick up the phone, you're not alone, man. Just pick up the phone, you're not alone. Yeah, pick up the phone, I'm right here. And I love you guys. Take those bottles out, dog, and pour them in the sink. Take the needles out your arm and the gun away from your forehead. It's time, man, you've been through enough pain. Stand up. It's time to stand back up. All my veterans, man, Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard. Get up, you know.
Oh, I try so hard to have faith.